My name's Amy Jo, and this is my story. So, I grew up in church. I was on the cradle roll, if anybody knows what that means, since I was a few days old. I grew up in church. I knew who God was, and I knew His love. But as you hear my story, you'll probably realize I didn't always rely on Him. I didn't always listen to Him. I didn't always ask Him what He wanted. Amy Jo lived for Amy Jo. And that's where a lot of my problems came from. I grew up in a Christian home. My dad was one of the church deacons. He was the youth director. My mom was the church secretary and helped him with the youth. So I grew up in a very loving, amazing childhood home. You know, I can't complain a lot. But when I got to be a teenager, I realized that some of those teachings were pretty shallow. I grew up in a Baptist church, nothing wrong there. But I realized that some of my teachings were pretty shallow, and I didn't learn to ask God, where are you going to go to school? Who are you going to marry? What kind of car are you going to buy? What kind of house are you going to buy? I just did what I wanted to do. I prayed about it. I thought I was asking God. I wasn't listening though. So when I met this guy in high school and we thought we fell in love and we got married, he was not the guy for me. I should have known then. God showed me all the signs of how he was not the guy for me. And I didn't listen. I kept pushing through. I had invested all this time in that relationship. I can't give up now, right? I'm not a quitter, so I won't quit now. I'll just push through. The day we got married, I got a message from God not to marry him. And I didn't know what that was all about. I didn't know how to hear from God then. I didn't know how to be a feeler, a hearer, a seer. I didn't know anything about that back then. So I didn't listen. And I married him. And it turned out to be a very, very abusive relationship. If I had only listened, right? I was physically abused, mentally abused, everything you can think of. My story's probably not as bad as others out there, but it was bad enough that the cops were called. It was bad enough that I feared for my life a few times. It was bad enough that I had bruises and finger marks around my neck. It was bad enough that I was scared. It was bad enough that the first time I ever truly knew that I heard a word from God, that I truly knew and listened, was when God said, "Get out now before somebody ends up dead." And I got paperwork within a couple of weeks after that. So that caused a lot of trauma in my life because I flat out didn't listen. I shouldn't have married him in the first place. After that, there were several things that happened in my life that I can remember that I prayed about, I talked to God about, but I certainly wasn't surrendering to him. I certainly wasn't listening to what he told me to do. I was still doing what Amy wanted to do. And asking God to bless it, of course, because that's what we do sometimes before we get to that place where we're in the surrender. We do something and then we ask God to bless it. And we ask God to stamp it with his approval. And we ask God to help us with it. But he can't put that blessing on it if he didn't give it to you. I ended up marrying a second time. Ended up meeting somebody, falling in love, and married a second time. The problem there was we both loved God, but because of trauma in our past, we weren't truly surrendered to God. We didn't truly know how to love others. We certainly couldn't love ourselves, and it was really hard to love each other. A lot of things happened in the second marriage that led to some abuse and yelling and a lot of bad memories. A lot of bad memories. My kids grew up in that environment, and because, again, we thought we loved God, and we thought we were listening, and we thought we were making the decisions we were supposed to, we asked Him to bless our decisions. And sometimes it didn't happen the way we wanted it to, because God's not the one who brought us to it. If He brings you to it, He'll bring you through it. But if He didn't bless it in the first place, it's really hard to try to make that successful in the end. Thankfully, a couple of years ago, we were both able to surrender. And if it's okay to take a little side step here, I'd kind of like to tell you about that. A couple of years ago, on a Friday, I moved out. My husband was abusive, screaming, yelling, playing mind games, emotionally abusive, spiritually abusive, started to be physically abusive, and I'd already been through that before, so I wasn't going to deal with that again. Thankfully, I had some amazing church family who gave me some strength, and I was able to gather some friends, and we cleared out the house while he was at work. He came home, of course, mad. I was already gone. But in that couple of months that we were separated, God stepped in. And it wasn't because God did all the work. It was because we surrendered. It was because we finally said, if anything in our life is going to work, parenthood, marriage, anything, it's going to take 100% surrender. It's going to take getting rid of those addictions, getting rid of being controlling, getting rid of all the things that are distracting you, getting rid of all the things that you have put in place of the only place that is supposed to be God's, getting rid of all of your own thoughts and saying it's all you, God. If this is going to work, it's going to be all in or nothing. And what we realized then were there were secrets and things that were being hidden. There was trauma that never got solved. There were closets full of trauma that needed to be pulled out and dealt with and thrown away and healed from on both sides. And we didn't even know it was there. So I'm gonna stress to you right now, if you're in a relationship and it's not quite going right, don't step into marriage until you get rid of the trauma. Get the counseling before you get married, not after. Seek your pastor, seek the Father before you step into that marriage commitment. Because we were married 15 years of mostly hell before I got help. That's sad, but it's true. While we were separated, and I know part of this is my husband's story, but it overlaps with mine, and he gave me 100% permission to share it. While we were separated, he had the biggest come to Jesus meeting I have ever seen happen. And I sat back and said, whatever you want, Lord, whatever your plan is, not my plan anymore, whatever your plan is here, I'm going to submit to it. Man, healing started the day that I sat in church and Pastor Steve was preaching. And he said, I'm not going to let Satan play games with my marriage, with my kids, with my relationship. I'm not letting him take my wife, take my kids, take my belongings. I'm not letting him in anymore. I won't allow it. And that spoke to me. I was at church that day. My husband, who I assumed was going to be my ex pretty soon, I had the money for the lawyer. It would have been cut and dry. Was at home watching on video, thankfully. He caught it too. it was a wake-up moment for him at the same time. I went forward that day, and as Pastor Robin and Pastor Steve spoke to me and they said, "What's going on?" And I said, "I'm done. I'm done doing this on my own. Amy Jo's done. This isn't my life. This is God's. And if God wants me to patch this marriage up with somebody who has hurt me, abused me, then I'm going to do it. Because if this is what God wants me to do, then He will put His blessings on it. And if He brings me to this place, He'll walk me through it. He will bless it. It'll be beautiful." I told them, "I'm done. I'm done doing what Amy Jo wants to do. I want all of what He wants. I want everything He wants. No holding back. I'm giving it all to Him. I want what He wants me to do." I left that day thinking, okay, God, what exactly does that mean? Because I don't know where Matthew's at on this. I'm just speaking for me and what I felt in church that day. I left and started to go back to my friend's house. I was staying at a friend's house with the 3 kids. And God said, "Take a cruise around town with me." I'd never heard Him say that before, and I thought, okay. As I'm cruising around town, words start flying out of my mouth, professions that were not me. Lord, if this marriage is going to work, then I want this escalated, and I want this quick, and I don't want to be separated from this man. If that's what you want from me, then I don't want to be separated for 3 months or 3 years or 13 years. If this is going to happen, all in, I'm ready. Let's do this. I want to do it your way this time, not my way. Every time I've ever tried to do something my way, it has failed and fallen apart. So this time I said, I want to do it your way, but can we hurry? I went home that night or that day, and that was a Sunday. Monday, I was told that my housing situation was not going to work out. Not from anything that I was doing, but outside circumstances. I needed to get out. And I was pretty distraught. I didn't have anywhere to go. I sat down and prayed about it, thought about it, talked to some amazing godly counsel. I'm going to tell you right now, if you're trying to do it all on your own, you probably need some godly counsel as well. Talked to some godly counsel and said, "You know what? I know that you and Matthew have been kind of getting along lately. You've been talking. You're not sure exactly where he's at on things. But he needs to know that you're about to be homeless. Maybe not homeless in the sense that you guys think of it, sitting on the streets, but I'm not going to have a place to go. And he needs to know what's going on." So I ended up sending him a text and saying, "Meet me at Wendy's. We need to talk tonight." And he did, and I laid it all out on the line. I told him about my housing arrangements because he didn't know where I was staying. I told him my housing arrangements were stopping. I told him about what Pastor Steve had said. I told him about me being at the altar crying, saying, "It's all you or it's nothing, God. And if you want this marriage to work, then I will put in 100%. And he said, "Wow." The same thing happened to me when I was at home. My face in the floor in our carpet at the house. And I gave it all to God, and I said, "If you bring my family back, I will do whatever needs to be done. But I really feel like this is not done yet. Please take care of my family until this happens, because I don't want this divorce. I don't want this, God. I want what you want." And for the first time in our marriage in 15 years, we did what God wanted us to do. And he blessed it. That was on Monday night. We moved back in on Tuesday night. we had to be out of our house by Wednesday. And it just happened to work out. We got a U-Haul and we moved everything back in. I can't say it was easy because it wasn't. I walked back into that house and all the old memories were there, ready to slap me in the face. It was hard. But we gathered hands that day. We gathered in a circle, held hands that day. And we prayed and we dedicated that family, the Thrasher family, to God that day. And we dedicated our marriage to God that day. And again, it hasn't been easy. 2.5 years ago was some of the hardest time of my life because I was living with my abuser and all the trauma was still there and I had to work through it. But with God, anything's possible. Anything is possible. He patched us up. He healed us. He took care of our trauma. Believe it or not, one of my best counselors to get through some of my trauma was my new husband, because he's not the old man anymore. He's a totally new guy. But he's been my best counselor through some of this. Times when I thought he was going to act like the old man and he acted like the new man, totally rewrote my book. My book was crapola. It was not nice. My memories were traumatic. My dreams were not nice. But every day I have decided to walk with God has rewritten my story. And my story is blossoming now. It's not full of trauma and drama. It's not full of anxiety and depression. It's not full of the abuse and the bad memories anymore. I'm filling my new book with new memories. And I say all of that and throw all this out on the table to tell you that you may have tried in your life to do things your way and it didn't work out. But you don't give up. You find a way to talk to somebody if you need to. You definitely talk to the Father. And you find out how to give it all to Him and surrender. And you find out that He can take your ashes of your past and He can make it something beautiful. I can't tell you we're exactly where we ought to be, but we're on the right path.